Hello, welcome to a special playoff edition of Pick 3 DST, where I give you 3 defenses I like and 1 defense I'm fading for the fantasy football playoffs. I'm your host, Eric Samulski, and while there are no weekly rankings here, if you want to click that link below, it'll take you to an article I wrote on the best fantasy football defense pairings, so that you can have 2 defenses on your roster with complementary schedules to get the best matchups every single week. We're going to start with the defense I'm fading for the fantasy football playoffs, and it's the New York Jets. Consensus has them 7th for the rest of the season, but I'm a little bit lower on them. The Jets have been good this year. They're my 8th ranked defense on the year, but they are the 11th ranked defense over the last 6 weeks, averaging just 7 points a game. So they're a fringe top 10 defense. And their matchups the rest of the way are the Lions, Seahawks, and the Jaguars. Only the Seahawks is a plus matchup of that pairing. The Seahawks rank 19th in fantasy points allowed to opposing defenses. But the Lions are 11th, and the Jaguars are actually 7th. So they're really limiting what opponents are getting, and the Lions have been playing some really good football of late. So I think the Jets are certainly a playable defense, but I think they're just outside of the top 10 for me as a fantasy football playoff defense. My sleeper defense for the fantasy football playoffs is the Los Angeles Chargers. Consensus has them 15th the rest of the way, and I can't believe I'm listing them here because they are my 27th ranked defense on the season. It's been a real rough go of things for the Los Angeles Chargers since they lost Joey Bosa in particular in week 3, but in week 16 and 17, they get the Colts and the Rams. So there really aren't really 2 better matchups for a fantasy defense to have for you. And there's also a possibility that Joey Bosa could be back. Brandon Staley said he might return to practice this week, and while we haven't seen it yet, that might mean there's a chance we can get him on the practice field next week. With the Chargers pushing for a playoff berth, if he can practice and play, they're really going to try to get him on the field. So this is just an outside shot in deep leagues of saying this is a defense that's really not performing that well, that might get their best player back and has 2 exceptional matchups. So they should be on your radar. I'm giving you a second sleeper defense, and it's the Detroit Lions. Consensus has them 27th for the fantasy football playoffs, and I think that's way too low. The Lions are actually tied for the Jets as the 11th ranked defense of the last 6 weeks, averaging 7 points a game. But this Lions defense is playing really well of late. They have a turnover in every single game since week 2, and they've forced 10 turnovers in their last 6 games. They have really solid matchups the rest of the way in the Jets and the Bears and the Panthers. So I think with the way this Lions defense is playing, plus the matchups they have, I think that they're a pretty strong option in deeper leagues, and they may even push to be playable in 12-team leagues as well. And my solid defense for the fantasy football playoffs is the Kansas City Chiefs. Consensus has them 10th, but I think that's a little too low in their rest of season rankings. The Chiefs have been the 5th ranked defense over the last 6 weeks, and they're putting up almost 9 points, actually a little over 9 points a game. So that's pretty strong. And then their matchups are against Houston, Denver, and Seattle. We already talked about how Seattle is ranked 19th in fantasy points allowed to opposing defenses, so it's an above average matchup. And then Houston and Denver are 2 top 5 matchups for fantasy football defenses. I know that Denver put up a lot of points against Kansas City the last time. Jerry Jeudy in particular went off, but I think that that's not really the norm of what we should expect, especially with the way this Chiefs defense has been performing of late. So I think you have a top 5 defense over the last 6 weeks with 3 really good matchups. I really don't see how the Chiefs are that low in the rankings. I think you should start them with confidence in the fantasy football playoffs. I do just want to make a point of saying if you've ridden a really strong defense to the fantasy football playoffs, the Eagles, the 49ers, the Cowboys, you don't really want to overthink it. We've seen a lot of grenades go off and trying to stream fantasy football defenses this season, thinking we're getting a really sneaky matchup and then just getting 3, 4, 5 points from a trendy defensive pick. If you have those really stud defensive units, likely that even in a bad matchup like we saw the Cowboys have against the Texans last week, you're still getting 4 or 5 points. That's not going to kill you. That security is super important in the fantasy football playoffs. I would be just running out teams like the Eagles and the 49ers and the Cowboys just to make sure that I have that security. If you have a tough matchup like when the Eagles and Cowboys face each other in week 16, then sure, some of these other matchups, some of these other defenses can be bumped up higher, but I really wouldn't overthink it if you have that stud defensive unit on your roster. If you haven't yet, please click below to like and subscribe to get Pick 3 DST every single week. as we give you the weekly rankings for the rest of this fantasy football season.